Welcome, everyone. My name is Stuart Meese with ROCS Grad Staffing. I'm the Director of North Carolina Operations. Glad that you're able to join us today for the first of our four-part summer webinar series to try and give you an idea of what's happening in the market today. And I'm so excited that Courtney from Universum is joining us. I have so much respect for Courtney and her organization, Universum, which is one of the largest, if not the best, employer branding firms in the world. I've worked with them for well over a decade when I was in the career services space, where we would help them survey our college students and get the insights in terms of what they were looking for and share it with our employers. There's so much rich content, data, and information that we were able to use to better help our employers and better help our students. And today we're bringing this to our ROCS family so that they have an opportunity to use the same information to be as successful as they can in this ever-evolving recruiting process. So I am recording this. It will be made available for you at the end. And if you have any questions, please send them within the document. I'll be monitoring that. And then I will interject Courtney either during the presentation or afterwards, and we'll have a great conversation here today. So without any further delay, Courtney, take it away.
Thank you, Stuart. Oh, just thank you so much for the kind words. And it's so great to be here with you and to see your face, and really appreciate you inviting me and inviting Universum to this. And hi, everyone. Really excited to be here with you today and to share some information on what Gen Z is looking for in an employer. So I've prepared some fun slides. I'm looking forward to the questions, the responses. So feel free to drop them in the chat as we go along. And yeah, here we go. I'll give you a quick intro just on myself and Universum before we get started, and then we'll get right into some of the data and what we prepared for you today. So a little bit on Universum. We are a global employer branding agency. We've been around for 30 years. I've been at Universum for about half that time, which is just like crazy to believe. Over 16 years. So I'm not a Gen Z. I fall into the millennial category, but we are globally headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden. That was where we started 30 years ago. I'm based out of Philadelphia. Well, I actually moved to the suburbs of Philadelphia about 2.5 years ago when I had our second baby. So we have a 7-year-old boy and a 2-year-old daughter, and we're living the suburb life here on the East Coast. Right outside of Philadelphia. I am our managing director for the Americas region. So I oversee US, Canada, and Latin America. We specialize in research, strategy, and activation. Really, this is how we kind of help and work with our clients. So we kind of, I think sit in between both the universities and also the employers. We work very closely with the universities to gather the data and the talent insights that we provide to our clients. These employers use these talent insights to adjust their recruitment strategies to better determine how they can stand out and how they can differentiate their employer brand. Ultimately, they want to figure out how do they better attract and retain the right talent. So we bring talent insights that feed into their employer branding and recruitment strategies. We help develop EVPs, or employer value propositions. So the messaging that companies will use, right, on the career site and recruitment collateral, communication planning, content creation, and then ultimately, how do we bring that to life through activation? So we're really helping companies throughout the entire employer branding journey. As Stuart touched upon, we've obviously worked very closely with Stuart collecting this data. So Universum runs what we call the career test, and we're partnering with universities really all over the globe to survey their students to understand who do students want to work for? Why are they picking one company over another? How can a company better communicate to this target audience? And so we're very grateful for the partnerships that we have in place to be able to gather this data. And then of course the universities will get a report back telling them a little bit more about their students, their career service centers. So there is an incentive, of course, for the universities to send out the survey. And then the students in turn also get a bit of a career profile back, telling them, are they an entrepreneur? Are they a go-getter? Kind of where do they fall within the career profiles? And then there's different incentives that are given, gift cards and things like that for taking the survey. So globally, we're surveying about 1 million people every single year. So this is an annual survey that we do conduct. So globally, about 1 million. And in the US this year, it was just around 50,000 students. So we have quite a big database of talent and insights that we're diving into to bring to you today. So I'm really, really excited to share this with you. All right, let's move on. All right, enough about Universum. Let's get into understanding Gen Z. So I'm going to start just a little bit level setting on who they are. I think most of us know who this audience is, but hey, it's worth a really good reminder. I think there's a lot of definitions out there. I think there's probably a lot of misperceptions out there on Gen Z as well, right? We've heard them all. They're addicted to their phones. They're addicted to technology. But this is the generation of Americans born from 1997 to 2012. What's really interesting when you start looking at this is, of course, a lot of them are in their post-education years. Some are getting into their careers. Some even have families, right? The youngest are at age 10. They are really using the most advanced technology on the go, as we know, grow up with their phones in hand, social media all the time. I mean, they don't know anything different, right? And so I think they're constantly connected, which means we as employers also need to be constantly connected, and we need to be present in the channels where they're actively spending their time, right? They want that snackable content. They want it fast. They want it quick. They want to be able to digest it and move on. And so it really, gives employers a new way to think about how do we communicate? How do we stand out? How can we be really effective in getting our message across? Because nowadays it's, we have 10 seconds to get that message across, and they're on to the next thing. More globally connected. I think, as we know, this is a very diverse generation that we're seeing here. They're globally connected. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok really allow them to interact with people all over the globe all the time. Of course, they felt the Great Recession. We see a lot of students saying, we have these side hustle jobs that we're doing. They're kind of the DIY generation, as we know. We've heard all of the coin terms, but they're also aware of debt, right? I think because of this, they're saying, is college something that I should do, right? Do I want to go to university? Do I want to be in debt? Or how can I make sure that I'm making money? They're seeing family members, even friends in some cases, losing jobs due to the challenges that we faced over the last few years. There's also this small cohort that kind of fall within the Gen Z millennials. You've probably heard of them, zillennials. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. But again, these are those who have attended college during the pandemic. So, I mean, again, we think about what they've gone through, something different that, many of us have never experienced, right? But it's, you didn't have the normal college experience. You're not in a classroom with your peers. You're sitting from home trying to navigate, such a critical time in your life. I mean, they've gone through things that I think many of us maybe have never gone through in the past. And of course, more focused on social justice and climate change. Again, what a powerful few years this has really been. And I think I really look at this generation, and you have such a profound respect for them because they really have gone through a lot. And I think especially over the last 3 years have really been able to show us a different way, right? And really stand up for things that they believe in, that we all believe in, and aren't afraid to ask for. And I think at the same time, as employers, they really hold us accountable. They're not afraid to say, this is what we expect, this is what we want. And as leaders, as managers, they're really turning to us. They want that constant feedback. I think they look at us and they think, previous generations probably made things a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. And so how can we do this faster, better? But at the same time, they want that instant feedback. They are competitive by nature in a very good way and want to know how they can be better than their peers. But there are a lot of stereotypes, right? And I think in addition to all of these amazing things about Gen Z, we also bring in another fun factor, which is that thing called, what is it? AI chat GPT. So we did a little fun thing here where we wanted to just show you when you look up on chat GPT, what does that say? What does chat GPT say about Gen Z versus what the more human intelligence side says from the Universum Talent Survey? So we're just going to do a little fun exercise. Again, no, I'm not going to put any pressure on any of you, no questions asked, but just to see, when we, because again, this is, I think, changing the dynamic in the game for a lot of us, as recruiters, as employers, this is adding a bit of a new spin. And so, I think our mentality is that it's never going to replace the human side of it. But when we go into chat GPT, what do they say about Gen Z students? They say Gen Z students possess strong digital skills that can contribute to their productivity and adaptability. I think that makes sense, right? Grew up on phones, social media, absolutely. Our Universum data says that according to students, they tell us they feel that sometimes they actually lack the practical skills, digital skills that are required by most businesses, right? They don't know the different platforms that are used within an organization, right? Things like, Salesforce and all the other Microsoft Teams platforms that they might not be used to. They feel they're lacking some of those general practical digital skills. Gen Z students, according to ChatGPT, they say, they have an entrepreneurial spirit. I think probably agree with that, right? DIY generation for sure. We definitely hear that they kind of do their side hustles. But on the flip side, the Universum data is also saying that when you look at who they want to work for, who their top employers are, they're really preferring these well-established organizations versus startups. It's actually 9-to-1, the ratio. And I'm going to show you in a little bit some of the data that sits behind this. So this is just touching upon it a little bit, but I'm going to show you what are their career preferences? Who do they want to work for according to the Universum data? ChatGPT also says they prefer opportunities that allow for remote work or flexible schedules. I would say that Universum says yes, and right. They also show an increase in desire for this flexibility. Of course, they say we still want remote work, we still want flexibility, but they are having some concerns. I'm going to show you what they are. And interestingly, our data also says, remote work, it's not really a deal breaker for me. Do I want it? Of course, but I know that there's a trade-off, right? I know that if I am going to get the flexibility and the work-life balance, it might mean that I won't have such a high salary, right? Or if I have the high salary, I might not also have the flexibility that I'm looking for. So I think they're pretty realistic and pragmatic in knowing that there is a bit of this trade-off. And then according to ChatGPT, Gen Z students, they value employers who provide development and clear pathways for advancement. Yes, they are definitely looking for ways to grow in their career. However, when we look at our list of attributes, we measure a total of 40 attributes in terms of what Gen Z students are looking for in a career and how they think certain employers match up to this. When we look at this attribute that we call clear path for advancement, it actually ranks only 17th as an ideal attribute or career preference according to students. So again, they're saying, yeah, I want it. Some students prefer it over others, but for the most part, they're picking other attributes that are more important to them when selecting an ideal employer. Again, I'm going to show you that data in a little bit.
Hey, Courtney, one question we had,
Sure.
people are asking, is this information for Universum just in the US or the Americas that you represent, or is this for the entire global survey that you're doing?
Yep. So great question. We're just focusing on US today, but we do have the global view as well that we're happy to share with you. Great question. And also when we look at what ChatGPT says, again, they really demonstrate this commitment to social responsibility. I think we would agree with that, diversity and inclusion. What we're starting to find in our data as well is that in some cases, elements linked to CSR, corporate social responsibility, even DE&I, in some cases, it's almost becoming table stakes. They expect companies to have corporate social responsibility. So out of the 40 attributes, CSR actually ranks 28th out of 40 when it comes to the ideal employer attribute. So I would say, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, it was a top priority. I think now we're hearing much more about inspiring purpose, right? Becoming a little bit more important. But as it relates to CSR, they're saying it's table stakes. Like we expect that a company will have it, but it won't necessarily differentiate them or make them stand out as an employer. So again, just a little fun way to look at the data. If we look at what ChatGPT says versus what Universum's data says, but I'm going to get into the real data now, show you some numbers behind it, break it down so you can see some real numbers and percentages and just how things have shifted over the last few years. I think we can all agree. This is a quote from our Chief Strategy Officer, that we see a subtle but meaningful pivot in the talent market right now. I think it's been an interesting time. I've been in this space for quite some time, and it's these last few years have really changed the game in terms of how we recruit. I keep joking, but also not joking, that I would not want to be a recruiter over these last few years. It is competitive. It is a candidate-driven market. It is becoming harder and harder to get the right talent, especially when you're looking for those critical talent segments, right? So it's super important that we understand this audience so we can better communicate who we are. We can't be everything to everyone. If we start communicating too many messages, right, that's when our message ends up getting diluted and we're not able to stand out and differentiate. So I'm going to share with you, according to Universum's US data, so this is just looking at US data, we surveyed again 50,000 students this year. Out of the 40 attributes, these are the top 5 most important career preferences according to Gen Z students. So you see secure employment at number 1, high future earnings, work-life balance, competitive base salary, and flexible working conditions. So right there in the top 5, it's all about the pay. It's all about the flexibility. I can tell you, 10 years ago, it was a lot about the reputation of the company, right? Am I going to work for a company that is prestigious, that has great products and services, that's going to help me build my resume, right? I feel proud to put my name, to put that company name on my resume. Then it really started to shift to the people and culture, right? Am I going to work for a company that matches my culture, that I'm looking for, my needs? And I think all of this is still important, but now when they're forced to kind of rank what's most important to them, it's the security, the stability, the pay, the flexibility that's really making up their top attributes here. We start to break this down a little bit as well by tech and business students. So I'm going to show you those two parameters as well, because we do see some nuances as we start to slice and dice the data. And for today, just for the sake of today, I'm looking a little bit at business and tech, but just so you all know, we can drill down by gender, ethnicity. We can really get into specifics around this audience. And it's always amazing to see, what they're looking for is so different. Again, it's not a one size fits all approach, right? We need to be able to tailor and tweak our message depending on the audience that we're going after.
May I interject a couple of questions here?
Please,
real quickly?
Yeah.
Do you have that information by region? So if we wanted to see the greater Washington, D.C. area, could you see that?
Yes, absolutely. We can break it down by region within the US. Yep, we can look at specific schools. We can also look at specific regions. So East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, absolutely. Yep.
And another question, we are going to have this information available for everyone. They've already seen how rich it is. Got a couple of messages there. And are you also going to show us of those 40 attributes, what are some of the bottom ones, like 38, 39, 40? Are you going to share that as well?
I am. I'm going to share the ones that are actually decreasing in importance because I thought you would ask that. And I think it's so interesting to look at, like, what do they care less about, right? What's becoming less important to them? So I do have a slide on that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Keep jumping in. Happy to answer any questions. Okay, let's take a quick peek at tech students. So I apologize for this crazy chart, but we wanted to give you a sense from 2018 to 2023, what has shifted. So secure employment, now #1 most important attribute to US tech students, 57%. If you look back in 2018, not as important as it is now followed by secure employment, followed by high future earnings and encouraging work-life balance. But you see these top two flip-flopping. So last year, tech students were saying high future earnings was more important. Now it's all about secure employment. And I think no surprise. I mean, there was a lot happening with the tech companies this year, right? A lot of layoffs within this industry. We're seeing now, and I'll show a slide on this, tech companies losing ground, the Googles, Amazons, Apples of the world, losing ground because I think young students, this generation is looking and saying, like, am I going to get both? I think it's the financial stability, but I think it's also like the psychological safety that this generation is really looking for, right? They're looking for companies where they're not going to have to worry about, layoffs in the same way. And so I think not surprising to see some of these shifts when we look specifically at tech students. But you can see some of the areas that did start to drop, and I'm going to show you in a bit the ones that had the biggest drops. But you see a little bit around flexibility dropping. I think it's a bit of an evening out. Friendly work environment going down a little bit, embracing new technologies dropping a little bit, but there really is that big gap between security and high future earnings. If we look on the flip side for business students, they're saying their #1 attribute is high future earnings. So instead of secure employment, like we saw for tech students, business students are saying, well, I care more about the high future earnings. So it doesn't have to be right now that I'm going to have the highest salary, but I want to know, long term, are there stock options, right? What does the future look like if I stay within an organization? So 57% of them are indicating that high future earnings is most important, followed then by secure employment. You see flexibility going up a little bit among this audience, and then everything else kind of staying the same compared to last year. A little bit of a shift, again, friendly work environment. Again, they're not saying I don't want to work for a friendly work environment. It's just becoming a little bit less important than it has in the past. What was interesting is we started diving into salary expectations, and we kind of overlaid this with inflation rates. So up the top is saying the percentage change that Gen Z students are saying they expect their salary to be. Now that orange line is Universum's data. The blue line are the inflation rates. These are salary expectations across the entire US. So I would just say, of course, there are differences by region. So, New York, California, those rates are going to be a little bit higher, the salary expectations, than in other parts of the country. But what was interesting was 2021 to 2022, right in the heart of the pandemic, salary expectations increased by 13%, pretty big increase. What we saw from 2022 to 2023 is actually it dropped down 6%. I think they're being a little bit more realistic. If you look at how it matches up with the inflation rates, it's actually mirroring the inflation rates. So they're saying, they're being realistic, although it might seem that, the expectations are very high compared to what we're used to paying. Students are also saying, but it costs me more for milk. Gas costs me more to drive to, to work, to class, all of these things. So, they're really trying to be, I think, as realistic as possible. And I think the good news is we're seeing a bit of the light at the end of the tunnel, where these expectations are starting to drop a little bit after such a high increase that we saw from 2021 to 2022.
One question also came in, the cost of education. Did you ask anything, especially in the DC area, has been so much talk here in the last couple of weeks about student loan forgiveness and so forth. Has that creeped into any of that answer as well?
Not too much. I mean, we ask a little bit around like sponsorship of future education, if that's something they're looking for from employers, but we didn't probe specifically on that particular element within this survey. Great question, though. I also wanted to look at remote working. I mentioned this earlier. So we did ask students, we've been asking it for a couple of years, are you interested in remote work? And so on the left-hand side, the pie chart is showing 2022 versus 2023. For the most part, 3/4 of them are saying, yes, I still want remote work. Not huge shifts compared to last year. But on the right, what we're showing is actually their concerns about remote work. So they feel like they're going to be isolated and miss out on these social connections. They think there might be a bias towards in-person employees. Maybe their earning potential will be less if I work remotely. So I think it's super important to address some of these concerns. If it is a company who is offering more of this hybrid remote working, I mean, we see so many companies now on their career site having a separate section just for remote workers and highlighting and calling out, the elements that are, differentiators for them, and what do they get versus those who go into an office. I think right now it's really, kind of that hybrid, a few days in the office, a few days from home, but being able to address these concerns, that feeling of isolation, having the bias for in-person employees. So, it's not a deal breaker, I think, is what we're seeing. It is important, but it's not really a deal breaker when they're selecting their ideal employer. And I think we've seen more and more companies now stepping out and saying, you have to work in an office, right? And there's not as much flexibility that we have seen, in the pandemic first hit, of course.
Yeah, I think commercial real estate investors would like to see the slide as well.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, so to answer your question, Stuart, this is now looking at what's becoming less important to Gen Z. So where did we see the biggest drops over the last few years? Interestingly, creative and dynamic work environment has dropped quite a bit. Again, probably because they're not always going into an office, so that appeal of, am I going to have free lunches, and are there ping pong tables, and, all of those elements that were super important years ago, they're saying, it's not as important to me as it used to be. Leaders who support my development have dropped a little bit. Again, I think they're still saying, we want this, it's important. They expect to grow within the organization, but I don't think they have the same expectations that leaders are responsible for their growth, right? I think they're saying it also comes from me as an individual. I'm also responsible for finding those opportunities within an organization for how I can grow. And it's not that same direct, clear line of advancement that they used to have and expect. Challenging work, interesting, that one has definitely dropped. That can be a pro and a con. Again, not saying that they don't want to be challenged, but they're saying, it's less important to me. And I think for a while, we've seen so many companies, rightfully so, focusing a lot on the candidate and the individual to say, come here, it's about you. Here's what you can get as the individual, less about what the company is and what they can offer, and more about what the company will do for that individual. Here's where we saw sponsorship of future education. I mentioned this, that has dropped here. So it's becoming less important. Most people aren't really thinking of going and doing future education, mainly because of the cost and the time commitment. And then, of course, the international aspect, which was really important for a while. And I think in certain parts of the world, it is still very important. In markets like EMEA, within Europe, we see the global international aspect still pretty important. It's a little bit easier, of course, to travel within Europe and have that international exposure than it is in a country like the US. And because of COVID, I think a lot of that has also shifted in the minds of Gen Z candidates. This was an interesting stat we looked at. So when students are taking the survey, we're asking them to pick from a list of employers. It's over 200 employers in the Universum survey. And we ask them, who would you consider working for? They can pick as many companies on average, as many companies as they want that they'd consider working for. On average, students are picking 27.6 companies. So when we look at business, engineering, tech, liberal arts, that's how many companies they're saying they would work for, 27.6 that they'd consider working for. When we look only at tech talent, they're picking almost 2 times that amount, 49.4 companies that they'd consider working for. So again, being able to stand out among this audience is becoming very critical and hard to do, because now you're not competing with 27.6 companies, you're competing with almost 50 companies on average for tech students alone. These tech layoffs, I think have really impacted how students kind of view the industry. They know they have more options than ever before. And they're also, not afraid to say, this is what I'm looking for in an employer. And I think for the first time in our own survey, and I'm going to show you some of the data, we're seeing these big tech companies losing ground for the first time. A lot of them didn't actually lose in terms of a rank, but in terms of percentages, they have dropped significantly. So you can see for tech students, this chart here, Facebook losing 7% of students who selected them as ideal compared to last year. Tesla, SpaceX, again, having big drops. Apple, Netflix, Google also losing. They tend to be in the top of our rankings. Students saying, I want to work for these companies. And they're losing ground for the first time this year, which is a pretty big shift. And I'm going to show you in a second. Okay, so who do they want to work for? But I'll pause here to see if there's any questions, comments.
We do not have any questions in the queue right now, so keep going, Courtney.
All right, sounds great. This talks just briefly about, they're looking for those industries that offer the financial security. So these are the industries that pop up in the top in terms of being most associated with job security. So on the right-hand side, it's looking, military, public sector, pharma, really being known for offering that secure employment, fintech, banking, losing a little bit of ground, ranking there at number 9 and 10. So who do they want to work for? I'm going to share with you the top ranked employers according to students. So as a reminder, this is US students. This is their perception of companies. So it's not that they necessarily worked for these companies, right? It's their ideal employer. So it's a non-biased survey. They did not work, at these companies. It is their perception of these employers, who they pick as ideal, who they'd consider working for. So if we look first at business students, this looks at the top 25 ranked employers according to business students. We still see Google there at number 1. They've lost just over 3.5 percentage points, but you now see JP Morgan Chase there at number 2. They moved from number 3 to number 2. And they're one of those employers, as you may know, who's saying everyone needs to be in the office, right? There's not a lot of flexibility, not a lot of remote working, a big shift for them to be there at number 2. You start to see the investment banks picking up a little bit, Goldman Sachs increasing and picking up some ground, same with Morgan Stanley, but you see those tech companies really dropping. We even saw some of the big 4 falling a little bit, the EYs of the world dropping a little bit, losing a little bit of ground. But, again, a mixed bag. You see a lot of different industries represented here in the top 25. But this is according to students who they pick as their top 25 ideal employers.
On that point, with big 4 accounting firms dropping, are you seeing fewer students wanting to enter accounting?
Yes, we are. We are definitely seeing fewer students wanting to go into accounting. And, I think, Stuart, from working with the accounting firms in the past, like I know as well, when I first started at Universal looking at this data, the big 4 were not even in, the top 50 of the rankings. And they did a lot of work around educating the industry, educating students on what is it like to work in the industry in general? What is accounting, right? What is it? Why is it cool? Why is it sexy? Because it's not really seen as a very sexy industry. So they had done a lot of work around educating students on accounting. But, it's becoming harder and harder to differentiate. And I think the consulting side of many of those professional services firms is still really appealing. But on the accounting side, they're definitely losing ground. And, again, I think students are saying, I don't want that same clear path for advancement that, I used to expect. They definitely don't want the same travel commitment that they used to have in some cases. And so there's kind of this opportunity, it's a very secure industry as well, right? They are a little resistant to having to make these huge changes. And so it will be, a challenging time, I think, for some of these industries who need to kind of break away from the misperceptions that are out there and really start telling a bit of a different story.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that.
Sure. Engineering, interesting. For the first time, Lockheed Martin ranking number 1, beating out SpaceX, who was number 1 last year. So huge for them. They really do a lot of work, I think, as many of you probably know, on, getting people through their funnel. They have a great internship program. I know that they have these Flex Fridays as well for a lot of people within their organization. So, kind of working more of a 4-day work week, as long as they get their work done, having these Flex Fridays, which I think is really appealing to this younger generation to have that flexibility. So, again, kudos to them. I mean, a lot of innovation happening there. So really proud for them to be number 1 there. And then you see, still quite a lot of tech companies in the top, but also a lot of automotive, right? I mean, GM, Toyota, Ford, Ford lost a little, but most of these, they're staying kind of the stable. To see a lot of automotive here within engineering. I mean, I think the idea of, self-driving cars, autonomous driving, it's a pretty cool time for students to want to be able to work in this industry. And I think we've seen a lot of focus from this industry around storytelling and finding ways to differentiate.
And a number of these employers listed here have significant operations in the Northern Virginia, Greater Washington, D.C. metro area. I know we've interacted with a number of these in the past, and if anyone's on the call and now looking at this, maybe you could just chat in your response to this. I'm sure Courtney and I and others would be interested in your take on this as well, since there's so many that either you may have worked for, compete against, or are more intimately aware of. So thanks for sharing that, Courtney. That's interesting.
Absolutely. And then the last one I'll show you is computer science. So this is looking, more at the tech audience. So this is definitely where we're seeing, the tech companies still ranked in the top 4. You see Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, but they are losing percentages. Google, Apple, both losing quite a lot of percentage points. Same with Tesla. So that's where you see that red bar. Facebook also losing about 7 percentage points. So again, this is where we're seeing tech companies, gaming popping up quite a lot, right? Nintendo, they're at number 8, increasing, which is pretty cool to see. Spotify, I think they do some really cool work when you think of their employer branding. Talk about, telling their unique story, showcasing the culture. They really personalize, I think, that experience quite well for the candidates. So, a lot of gaming companies being called out here, but then you see an anomaly like JP Morgan Chase at number 23, moving up 6 spots. One of the only, real banks there in the top 25. Which is pretty interesting to see among tech talent. So we're definitely seeing some big shifts among this audience in terms of who they want to work for. Some years, the data looks pretty stable. And for me, it's always like, oh, that's boring. I want to see some big shifts. And my research team is always like, but Courtney, then our data is very volatile if that were the case, right? We don't want to see these crazy shifts, but when something like, a pandemic happens, of course, and all the tech layoffs, of course, these bigger macro trends that are happening are going to cause some of these bigger shifts in the data as well. So,
Courtney, one question on this. You're showing it by academic discipline now. Do you have this by industry, specifically nonprofit association? We have a lot of clients in that particular space, again, in the DC metro area, and also from the logistics supply chain industry. Do you have any insight there for us?
Yep, absolutely, we do. And interestingly, when we look at nonprofit, I'm not showing it here, but we also survey natural science students and liberal arts. That's where we see a lot of the nonprofit companies ranking really high in students' minds. So when we look specifically at, again, liberal arts, natural sciences, they have separate lists, right? So if you're a liberal arts student, you might see a slightly different list than a tech student, for example. So happy to share that with you as well, so you can see how some of those companies rank. We can filter it by industry as well. We can even look at industry preference. If a student wants to go into nonprofit, who are they picking as their ideal employers? Even if they want to go into nonprofit, you'll find that they may not always pick nonprofit as their ideal employers, right? They're keeping their options open, but we can definitely share that list with you. You'll see companies like NIH, for example, really high in the top of the ranking. So happy to share that with you.
Yeah, Jennifer, we'll get that to you. Thanks for chiming in.
Yeah. So I have a couple slides left, I think maybe 3 or 4 slides. So we'll keep chucking along and we'll just kind of wrap it up. At this point, I just wanted to end with some food for thought and things to think about when attracting and also retaining Gen Z talent. So these are some best practices that we're seeing from companies. It's all about the differentiation. We're talking with, companies all over the globe. And I think more and more they're saying, it's all about differentiation. For students, we've heard them say it over and over again. When I walk into a career fair or it's like a sea of words, everyone is saying the same thing. And I think this kind of shows you, companies are out there talking about making an impact. They're talking about, how to make an impact, right? It's becoming harder and harder to differentiate when everyone is saying the exact same thing. And so we just keep encouraging companies, how can you stand out? Of course, you can talk about the impact that you'll make, but how do you say it in a way that is unique and differentiating to you? Is probably the most important thing that a company can do to really stand out. we're seeing more and more companies focusing on that authentic storytelling, right? Being really real to who they are. When developing EVPs, it's really about focusing on both the internal side of it, right? What can we bring as an employer? What is attractive to talent? But it's that snackable content, right? They want the authenticity that they're used to seeing, not these big fancy videos or really polished photos, right? They want the real side of it, just like, what we see when we're on Instagram and different platforms, right? That really authentic side of what it's like to work at an employer. So again, this is just another example. And I think the last one here is, thinking about the platforms where talent's spending the most time. We're really seeing, of course, this year that it's still that balance of the high tech and the high touch. I mean, career fairs have not gone away. There's still a channel and a tool and a platform that students are using to learn about employers, but they're spending a lot more time on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. So we're seeing more companies trying to expand into the TikTok world and figuring it out. It's definitely a different way of communicating. It helps to build the kind of broader awareness, right? So when you think about the recruitment funnel for those companies who are looking to increase their awareness, get more people into their funnel, it's a really great platform to showcase that snackable content, the authentic stories in a little bit more fun and playful way. And then of course that can then, it doesn't have to just live on TikTok. It can then, move over to other platforms within Meta as well. So again, great opportunity for companies to be showcasing these stories.
I know you've done this in the past. This is my own personal question here now.
Sure.
Where you, and you may not have this at the top of your head, but there used to be a question asked, what were the channels and ways in which young recent graduates were finding information about jobs? It was social media or LinkedIn or some of the ones that you had, or job fairs or Handshake or like Indeed. Any insight as to the ones that are at the top of the list?
Great question. And I can drop it in here before I send you the deck. I don't have the slides in here, but we do have the charts, and I can tell you that we asked two questions. So one, just in general, what are the channels that you're using? Social media is in the top, followed by career fairs. So career fairs are still pretty important. They're the top two. But then within, the digital platforms, we're asking, okay, now what specific channels are you using? I'm trying to think of what the number one is. I think it's the career site, and then Handshake is in the top three. Instagram is in the top, YouTube is in the top as well. So those tend to be, Indeed, I can't think of where it ranked. I'll drop it in here, but we do ask both sides. So in general, what channels, and then specifically within the digital space, what are the platforms and in specific channels that they're using as well. TikTok's not quite up there in the top 5 yet, but it has increased quite a lot from last year, which is interesting. So, we're starting to see, a bit more, interest from students, and they're being okay with, TikTok being the platform. LinkedIn, of course, I didn't mention that, but yes, LinkedIn, right. Glassdoor, of course, also really high in the top. I think that one has been interesting. I'm definitely finding that Glassdoor has been, even on the employer side, many companies are spending a lot more, I would say, time and commitment to addressing, Glassdoor reviews, trying to get their ratings up, because they know how many students are going on to Glassdoor and reviewing the company. And so, again, they're looking at these ratings and comments. And so trying to get more employees to, address some of that and speak about the positive things. As we know, it's always easy to comment on the negative things that happen, but, how do they get their employees to really also showcase the positive side too? So.
That's great. Thank you for addressing that.
Sure. I think I'm at my last slide, and I'll send this to you, but this just, kind of summarizes the key takeaways that we're seeing, some of the trends and observations here. So I won't dive into this too much. I think we covered most of it. here. But, I think overall, we keep saying, show me some money. So it's dropped a little bit, right? It's not all about the money now. It is also about the flexibility that they're looking for as well. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as well. And Stuart, thank you for inviting me. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. Really enjoyed that. There is so much good information in there, and I'm glad to see that Universum continues to be a leader in this particular space, and we can bring this to our clients and prospects and teammates as well. I don't have any more questions at this particular time, but oftentimes what happens is people send questions afterwards, so I'll forward those to you separately offline. But really appreciate your time joining us today, and you are the first of 4 that we have in a summer series. And I'm glad you mentioned ChatGPT, because our next one is going to be about how AI is going to impact recruiting. From an individual that's been doing some very interesting stuff here in this. And so that will be our next one. We'll send that out to everyone as well. If you're on the call and you have any interest in partnering with us, if you're looking for some additional help for that job that you may not be able to fill, that's what we're here for. We are willing to partner with you. Our specialty is that 0 to 5 year talent. So you can see how this data that was shared today is very relevant to our niche audience. If there's no other questions at this time, we really appreciate everyone's time. I will get you the information, the slide deck at the end that Courtney has so graciously allocated to us. And until next time, hang in there. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Awesome.